How's it going, guys? Thank you again for joining me on this newest episode of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiege, bringing you guys a great show today with a lot more new topics to talk about around the NFL and just football in general. Starting off with the chip shot story of the day, I'm going to be talking about the Cowboys yet again. Some comments made by Jerry Jones, this time specifically on Dak Prescott and his contract situation. Then I'll transition into talking more about Justin Fields and a lot of contradicting reports that are coming out a lot after the NFL Combine. And at a point where I predicted that there was going to be more answers around this issue, there seems to be a lot more questions, so I'll dive deeper into that. Then, in the later half of the show, I'll talk about some things that were discussed at the NFL Combine away from the players testing and doing their drills on the field, around off-the-field issues, contracts, negotiations, stuff like that. A little bit more rumors to discuss before I wrap it all up with the big story coming out of the NFL Combine around J.J. McCarthy and his recent surge up to the top 10-ish prospects in the NFL draft after a very solid NFL Combine and good interviews, good drills. I'm going to be talking about that and why I believe he rose and what it could mean for other quarterbacks in the draft. All that coming in today's episode. But before I start, I want to remind you guys to please use the tip and donations link if you have any questions during the live show and want to interact with me. To do so, use the tip and donations link like I mentioned. It's gsmcpodcast.net. Again, the link is easy, simple to read on the screen. It's gsmcpodcast.net. This just makes sure I'm able to see your questions pop up to the right-hand side of my screen. I'm able to interact with you guys and just makes the show a lot better. If you guys have questions at any point during the show, I'm able to see it and read it live on the air. Not only is it a big help for this show, but it's also a big help for the network and all the rest of the shows on the network as well. And it's greatly appreciated every time you guys are able to do that. But that allows me to go into the first story, as always, the chip shot story of the day, revolving around the Cowboys. Just becoming a lot more prevalent in the offseason with anything they say. It's the Cowboys. Anything they do, they say it's going to make news. And again, it's just a lot of talking for now, obviously, because we're in the offseason. And this time, it's involved with their owner, Jerry Jones, and Dak Prescott. As you all know, not the best of performances in the playoff. That's a kind of the last taste we got of the Cowboys, and specifically Dak Prescott. He's actually been one of the more quiet Cowboys in this offseason up till now. But his name was brought up in a recent interview that Jerry Jones did recently after the Combine and all those activities. And I read an article on ESPN. According to Todd Archer of ESPN, Jerry Jones said in his interview that basically, in his words, he said, "My point is that we can play better. Dak can play better than he has maybe. We could argue one of the best years he's ever had in his career. But the good news is I'm convinced that he can play better, and I'm convinced that we can do some things better all the way around, and so we're all in." We're all in seems to be becoming one of the more favorite phrases for Jerry Jones. I mentioned it really at one of the earliest shows of this network, of this just show journey, that his all-in comments, what it could mean, and now he kind of brings it up again, reassuring, I think, what he's really feeling, what his goal is of this whole offseason, that he's going to try to do the best he can to push everybody to get something different out of this season. The story around the Cowboys is the playoffs, not really performing well in it. And you could fault a lot of players. A lot of people say it's on Jerry, funny enough, just because he's always in the center of things, always commenting. He's too involved is the main message everyone's kind of getting out about Jerry Jones and why this team may seem distracted. There may be added pressure on them for them to kind of crumble in the playoffs. And that's one reason. Another reason just could be simply the players. They don't show up. They have a lot of star players that do amazing in the regular season, but just fail to show up in the playoffs. And a lot of those star players, you could say, are dependent on the quarterback, Dak Prescott, and he's also at fault a lot of times getting heat from the media and just having to respond for all these shortcomings because, he is the quarterback, the presumed leader of this team. Now, you could argue him or Micah. Micah's starting to step up more into that role just this offseason with some of the comments that he's made and just trying to become more involved to get this narrative to change around the Cowboys. But sticking on Dak Prescott, he has kind of been the leader up to this point mostly, and a lot of questions are raised now because he is coming to the end of his contract. He has actually 1 year left on his contract coming into this offseason, and the Cowboys have some options that they could go with in regards to Dak Prescott, and just that initial statement from Jerry Jones kind of laid it out a little bit where he's feeling Dak Prescott is in his development, I guess you could say. Or you could argue that if he's still developing, he's about to be 27 or 28, I believe. So if he's still developing, that you could take that as an issue, or, how much better is he going to get? But regardless of that, that's a good way of seeing where Jerry Jones is feeling around him heading into this pivotal year, which is why I think we keep seeing this phrase, we're all in, we're all in. I think it's just almost a subliminal message in a way by Jerry Jones to reassure that, get that out there, get people to buy into that message, and it's almost like a warning potentially for next offseason if things don't go right. He's already put this out there that, this is the season, we're all in. And if it doesn't pan out, people could go back to that comment and say, this is why we're seeing these changes. This is how Jerry felt. And if the team might have let him down, people go back to that quote and say, this is why. Furthermore, on this issue with Dak and this season being so important for the Cowboys, it's important, one, because, the fans, everybody wants to see the results. This team's way too talented to not produce in the playoffs, but also just with his contract. It's set to expire in 2025. He'll be an unrestricted free agent. But what's interesting about this contract is that the Cowboys can't franchise tag Dak Prescott next year if they're tight on money again. There's a clause in his contract that doesn't allow him to be tagged. And the Cowboys could just do nothing and, not extend him this offseason if they choose to. And if they do that, no extension up until next offseason. It'll be set to count nearly $60 million against the cap with no extension. And, that's obviously a bad thing. So other things that the Cowboys can do that are on the table as well, they could lower that cap figure with a new deal. They could give him a new one, but, the rumors are out there that he wants to be one of the highest paid quarterbacks in the NFL. If you want to argue that he deserves it or not, that's up to you guys to decide. But that's the kind of route it's going because that's how Dak performs in the regular season. And just the feelings out of his camp are arguing that he deserves that money. Why would he argue otherwise? But regardless of that, he could get a new deal, making him one of the highest paid quarterbacks. And then, that could hinder the Cowboys as well for some reasons I'm about to get into. But another thing they could do is restructure his current deal. And if they do that, it'll create $18 million in cap space this offseason, but it'll be adding dead money next offseason in 2025 when, his contract is up and all that. We've already seen the Cowboys release their left tackle, Tyron Smith. That created a good amount of cap space, but there's still $10 million in the cap deficit. So they still have some other things to work out. The general feeling, the predicted outcome of all this offseason at least, is that people are starting to feel that the Cowboys will at least restructure that deal to create that $18 million of cap space. And, that's as far as it's going. The reports and just everybody around the Cowboys, around Dak, don't feel like an extension is going to happen this offseason. And one of the points that kind of support that is Jerry Jones, again, in that interview that I mentioned before, he went on further to say, to kind of close out his sentiment on Dak, he said, what we do there or don't do there, I couldn't say at this time in regards to Dak's contract, but the main thing is he's going to be our quarterback. And that seems great, just on the surface. He's going to be our quarterback, reassuring a little bit. But the initial part of that is when he says what we do there or don't do there kind of leaves the door open a little bit, leaves the door cracked a little bit. He's not fully committed to Dak Prescott in a way that, we're going to sign him, nobody worry about that. He didn't say that. He left the door open, just based on what he does really this offseason. If he deserves it, then I'm sure Jerry Jones won't have any issue paying him that contract that he's wanted next offseason. But, he's just still, it seems that he's in a position of uncertainty right now. All the chips have to fall, and just based on that, it looks like they won't really get an extension done this season. I think where you go from there is interesting because if you're Dak and you see these quotes, what are you thinking? You could react poorly and think, what more do I have to prove in his mind? But a lot of people could bring up a lot of things, in the playoffs and all the things like that, performing to that level of competition. He hasn't really done that. But another thing that, just surrounds this whole issue with cap and extending Dak Prescott, they're in a cap deficit like I mentioned already this year. And to say that Dak is due an extension this year and that he should get it this year, it kind of contradicts what Jerry Jones and Micah were talking about before when Micah came out and said, he's trying to filter out all these players that shouldn't be in the locker room, that shouldn't fit into the culture that they're trying to build. And he seems that he's going to try and be pretty active in recruiting other players, trying to get players in here that he believes add to the culture to make them better in the playoffs. But you can't really do that if you extend Dak and then you have even less money than you already do. And, you got to pick and choose there. What do you think is best for this team? If finding those reinforcements elsewhere and just taking a gamble on Dak to see if he proves you wrong this year? Or do you extend Dak just because he's your quarterback? Everybody needs a quarterback, and hope that he gets better in the playoffs with a roster that's already talented enough, but questions still remain on their attitude, their culture. This whole offseason has been around their culture and stuff like that. And just the last thing to close this segment out is, if you extend Dak to a big contract, where does that leave you next season? If you already have a lot of money allocated to Dak, CeeDee Lamb is also due for a contract extension next offseason, and Micah, I think you can pick up his fifth-year option. I'm almost certain of it, but, he's coming up on getting a lot of money as well. So how do you allocate all that money? You might have to sacrifice. If you do have to sacrifice one of them, I'm sure 70% of Cowboys fans and anybody in that organization would choose to sacrifice Dak just because of the projection, the higher ceiling that CeeDee Lamb and Micah Parsons have in terms of performing, leadership. I already mentioned Micah's kind of stepping into that leadership role and trying to be more active with that. So if it did come down to it, I'm sure the Cowboys would choose to find a new quarterback. But, it's in a very gray area right now where a lot is being made of this situation, but really it only seems like the minimal will be done, which will be that restructuring of his contract. And then next offseason will be the biggest, potentially in a long time, for the Dallas Cowboys if they had to find a new quarterback, find a new head coach, if they fire Mike McCarthy, who's on the last year of his deal. All the questions are being brought up now, but the answers will most likely come next offseason for the Dallas Cowboys. So that's kind of where that stands right now in terms of the Cowboys and what those comments meant by Jerry Jones. That just allows me to put a pin in that conversation and move into the next segment, which will come after the first break, which we're going to jump into now. But don't go anywhere. Coming up later in the show, I mentioned J.J. McCarthy and him rising up draft boards a lot among NFL executives, as well as conversations around what was talked about in the NFL and where does Justin Fields stand with the Falcons, with these other teams that have interest in him, but no one's really pulled the trigger as of yet. All that and more coming up on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the news it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh,
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Back here on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, presented by the GSMC Sports Network. If you weren't able to join me for the first segment, I just went over what Jerry Jones said recently in an interview in regards to his quarterback, Dak Prescott, and what actions could happen this offseason in terms of his contract and potentially next offseason where it could really mean more in terms of Dak, the rest of the team, and so forth. But joining me now for this second segment, I'll be talking about Justin Fields and a lot of contradicting reports going on with him around the combine, which teams have actually talked to him, which teams actually have legitimate interest in him. You know, when the combine started, I'm sure I mentioned that this whole Justin Fields situation would be a lot clearer after the combine because at the combine, a million things are talked about in terms of extensions, trades, free agency, potential contract extensions, meeting with agents, and then you have actually meeting with the prospects at the draft. All that is talked about, and Justin Fields has been at the center of everything with the Bears because obviously they hold the number one pick, and they kind of dictate right now where the route that this draft is going to go because they could trade out of it like they did last year, or they could stick with Caleb Williams, which is the favorite option as of right now. And if they do that, you know, where does that leave Justin Fields? Everyone expects him to get traded. And the main, I guess, idea surrounding Justin Fields was that it was the Falcons as the main favorites. They were, I think, in betting terms, they were minus 400 at least to get a trade done with him. He's from Atlanta, Georgia. It all made the most sense there to fit into a young nucleus with Kyle Pitts, Drake London, Bijan Robinson, new head coach, new offensive coordinator. It all could be a fresh start for Justin Fields, and it all made sense. You know, the Steelers were also reported in that conversation, but their general manager, Omar Khan, came out and said, you know, a lot of support for Kenny Pickett. They're sort of trending in a direction where they're going to give Kenny Pickett another chance. Now, does that mean he deserves to be the unquestioned starter? Probably not. Omar Khan said that he wants competition there, as in he wants it in all positions. He thinks it's good for the team. And, you know, everyone's still waiting to see what the Pittsburgh Steelers do with their quarterback situation. I don't have to mention all the free agents that are out there, but that's another option. There's the Vikings. You know, if Kirk doesn't come back, the Raiders with really no number one quarterback. They're sitting in a spot that's not really good for drafting a quarterback. I think they're at 12 or 13 around that area. So all the top guys seem to be predicted to be gone by then. So where do they stand? Do they take a chance on Justin Fields? And the reports, I saw three that were very, in just the span of the same day, I think, that were very, very contradicting. The first one I saw was the Falcons' interest is actually overblown in Justin Fields. The report by U Stadium said that they prefer Cousins as their top option. And, you know, it added that the market value for Justin Fields isn't as strong right now as many people are led to believe with the package they're expecting. And I think right now, at best case scenario, the Bears might have been expecting a second round pick. But it seems like a lot of teams are hesitant to give that just because of what Justin Fields has performed as of late in his career with them. And he's coming up on a fifth-year option that's going to cost a lot of money, north of $20 million for Justin Fields. So there's questions around that. that was the first report. The Falcons are kind of iffy on it. They're not as serious as many people thought. The second report said, this one coming from Diana Rossini, that the Falcons believe that Cousins is the type of player that moves them from a fringe playoff team into a true contender. Rossini reported, so it kind of supports that first one. Kirk Cousins fits this kind of mold that Zach Robinson, their new offensive coordinator, wants to run. He's a veteran. He's proven it. He's had success more so than Justin Fields. So he can kind of come in, jump in right away to this offense and lead this young team in a positive direction, a more experienced direction that, could be a lot more beneficial for a new head coach, new offensive coordinator, that the first year is so pivotal if they have a veteran leader, especially at the quarterback position. It could go a lot smoother for them just for personal reasons and for personal preference as well. If you're getting a new job, you want it to go as best as you want. This could lead them in that direction. They also added, or Diana Rossini added, that they could make a move for Baker if Cousins, stays with the Vikings and he decides to take their offer, which is at a stalemate right now, those negotiations. She reports also that knowing this could be a seamless transition for Cousins and a talented young group, like I mentioned before. And she said that she expects the Falcons to compete for the rights to his contract. It all makes the most sense to her in that aspect, to bring in that veteran. Even Baker, who's younger than Kirk Cousins, he's coming off of more recent success than Justin Fields, so you could see why they could decide to go that route. It'd be weird because he'd be moving within the division and have to play the Bucs twice in a year, and also with the news that Mike Evans just signed with the Bucs, a lot of people find it hard to believe that Baker will see that and still move on. But, people don't know what's going to happen. And that was the second report, just supporting the first one, kind of giving off the same vibe just there. But the third one was very different. This one coming from Tony Pauline. And he basically said that the word around Indianapolis is that the Bears are actually very close to trading for Justin Fields. That report came out about 2 to 3 days ago on Friday or Saturday. And very contradicting to what I just said, but in his words, he said, "It is not known if the deal will be finalized or even announced before the conclusion of the Combine. As I reported Thursday, if the Falcons can't come to terms with the Bears for Fields, they will turn their attention to Baker if he's available when free agency starts." He started it off by saying the deal is just about done. Their interest still remains strong, but it's after the Combine where we're going to get the most answers, it feels like now, because we're up to this point and there really hasn't been anything announced on the Justin Field terms. And, he kind of alluded to them still pursuing free agents, but his main thing was that the deal was close. But now we're a day removed from the Combine, and it's just crickets. Nothing has really been said, no rumors or nothing. Anything has been reported on that end. And, the comments from General Manager Ryan Poles, he's trying to say that he wants this to be done as quick as possible for the team's sake and for Justin Fields' sake as well, because it's not good for any of them, for both parties, to live in this sort of gray area, uncertainty surrounding the whole situation. People want to know. They want to base their plans off of everything. I'm sure if Justin gets traded, he'll want to get integrated with his new teammates and his new coaching staff and everything, a new city, as soon as possible. But nothing's really moving right now, and that kind of brings you to a place where you're asking, a lot of different things. One of them is, these teams see the urgency that the Bears have at this moment in time. Everyone is thinking that the Bears are drafting Caleb Williams. So that kind of puts more pressure on them to get this deal done. Everybody else is kind of just sitting back, knowing that the Bears have to get rid of Fields if they're going to draft Caleb Williams. Everyone's taking their foot off the brake a little bit, taking it easy, not banging on their door, trying to get Justin Fields, if they know with the general sense of the Combine that they're going to trade him anyway. So what's the point of rushing it? The later this drags on, the worse it definitely gets for the Bears, because if you get to the draft and nothing's been done and Fields is there, seeing you draft your future quarterback, it's going to be a very awkward one and just add a lot more pressure to the front office. Not to mention how Caleb Williams feels if Justin Fields is still there. What's he going to think going into camp? Everyone reaches out to the new draft pick. Is Justin Fields going to reach out to Caleb Williams? All these weird sensations could go on if this drags on further and further. And it lowers the price lower and lower as well for the Bears and for every other team, because the Bears want to avoid that situation at all costs. And with both of them still being on the roster, they just might pull the trigger on whichever deal comes in, and it could be giving him away for nothing. And that's where the Bears stand out right now, kind of measuring, kind of taking the temperature of the situation, what teams are really interested and, not trying to get fleeced really in the end for their quarterback that they drafted 11 in the first round. It just takes me back to that trade they made with the Steelers for Chase Claypool. Chase Claypool isn't even on a team right now, and they traded a second-round pick for him. And the Steelers got the first pick in the second round. They drafted Joey Porter Jr., and Claypool, like I mentioned, isn't even on the Bears anymore. Is a free agent right now, and that is obviously now, in hindsight, a bad trade for the Bears. They want to avoid that. But because no one is showing any real interest, what do you do now if you're the Bears, if you're Ryan Poles, trying to assess what you can get back for Justin Fields? And also, what is it in the best interest for the Falcons? They're really the favorite at this point, but, thinking about it more and more, do you want to put all the pressure from Raheem Morris trying to do his best, Zach Robinson trying to do his best, on Justin Fields, because you have that price kind of hanging over your heads of his fifth-year option? And, where's his confidence level at? Is he going to fit into the offense you want to run? Is he the kind of talent? I won't say talent because he is very talented, but is he the kind of decision maker, the kind of quarterback that you want running your offense and essentially being the face of your offense if it all goes well, if you're investing a lot in trading for him? The Falcons really have to gauge that and see what's in their best interest. They might think that's too big of a risk for the price tag that he'll take up, plus future extensions for Kyle Pitts. That's coming up as well. So they have to gauge all their options, and they might feel, they need more time. And they don't have to rush the Bears because the Bears have to sell anyway if they're going to draft Caleb Williams. And on top of that, just coming off of the combine and seeing especially how these quarterbacks performed, the Falcons and, the Giants, if the Giants also want to trade for a new quarterback, that was a rumor, if they want to move on from Daniel Jones. With the performance of these quarterbacks in the combine, the talk is about J.J. McCarthy. Michael Penix had a great combine as well. The throwing drills were great. The medicals were better than a lot of people expected with his past injury history. He threw the heck out of the ball at the combine. So those two guys are rising up draft boards. And, there's still the three at the top. And then you have Penix. Bo Nix is still in there. And J.J. McCarthy now rising to the top of draft boards. All those guys could be available for the Falcons if they just stay put at 8. So why would they have to trade for Justin Fields? The longer this drags out, I keep saying it, the more reasons it gives other teams to look elsewhere. And it really lowers the leverage that the Bears have for Justin Fields if they don't make a decision quick. But again, they have to toe that line of not giving him away for pennies, but getting something in return. At this point, it's moving to me from a second-round pick to at most a third. And if it goes even longer, I don't think it'll go below a fourth, but you never know. It could be a couple fourth-round picks or something like that, but I think they'll end up getting a third from somebody out there that, values Justin Fields, thinks that they can make it work. But the Bears are really in a bad situation right now compared to all the other teams, just mostly because on the combine, and they don't have time really on their side. If they're convinced by Caleb Williams, they'll take him. And then, they have to pull the trigger. They just have to if that's what they're going to do. And right now, what's Justin Fields thinking? I'm sure he has all these questions, and you don't want him potentially adding pressure to the organization as well. If he comes back from vacation, there's nothing resolved, and he wants to get ahead, in his best interest, wants to get ahead of everything, start planning things out, putting more pressure on the organization. This could get very tricky, and it could be very murky waters for the Bears if they don't figure out something soon enough. But, some reports say that they're close. We're going to have to wait and see where this all ends up. With the league year officially starting in about 9 days now on the 13th, that'll definitely give a lot more answers to these questions. But, I think the Bears are definitely itching to get a deal over the line. But, we're going to have to wait and see. But that's all on the Justin Fields front, really up till now. A lot of questions now rising after the Combine, and not too many answers up till now. But that'll just send us into our second break. And on the other half of this break and on the other half of this show, I'm going to dive into some more things we learned after the Combine in regards to negotiations, extensions, and other rumors that were discussed among executives and team members at the Combine, as well as the biggest story on J.J. McCarthy and his rise to some of the top of draft boards, and just some people think he could go top 5 if the Chargers trade back. So stick around. I'll let you know what I think on that. You're watching the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Don't go anywhere.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Back here on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, I'm your host, Manny Maradiege, starting the second half of the show. If you couldn't join me for the last segment, I talked about the contradicting rumors coming out of the Combine on Justin Fields and what to make of all of that. Now, that allows me to jump into the second half of the show, but before I jump into the topic, again, I want to remind you guys, if you have any questions, any interactions you want to talk during the live show about, please use the tip and donations link with any questions that you may have. The tip and donations link is gsmcpodcast.net. Again, if you're listening to this, it's gsmcpodcast.net. Just using this link with your question, it puts it to the top of the list so I can see it as it comes in. I'm able to read it on the air, and it's a lot more fun interacting with you guys and seeing any questions, reactions that you might have to the show and any of the topics that go on during the show. It's also a massive help for this show and other shows across the network, and it's greatly appreciated every time you guys use the tip and donations link with any of your questions. But going back to the topics at hand, some stories that kind of arose and were talked about at the NFL Combine among people, away from all the prospects and all the attention that they garner, talking about other issues that still have to be resolved. Some of the things that we know after the Combine that have become a little bit more concrete is that the Vikings, as everyone knows, are trying to get an extension done with Justin Jefferson, and he's expected to get a lot of money, and that sort of leads people to believe that, they could lose out on their star pass rusher, Delaney Hunter. He's rumored to want a lot of money as well, potentially north of $20 million, kind of in the range maybe of a Myles Garrett at $25 million. I don't think he'll get north of 25, in TJ Watt range, Nick Bosa range, but he's produced that on average has had 14 sacks in the last 4 seasons that he's been healthy, which is the biggest thing. But, he feels that he can bring that to the negotiation table, and on that, he could garner this sort of contract which would be north of $20 million, and there's no way the Vikings can afford that. Plus the extension for Justin Jefferson, which I'm sure is their number one priority, on top of trying to re-sign Kirk Cousins and get a quarterback under contract. One of those three is most likely going to have to go or not be happy with a contract offer from the Vikings, and it's most likely going to be Delaney Hunter, as it's been rumored and has become more and more likely to happen. And obviously, if he does hit the free agency market, he's going to be a very heavily targeted free agent with the contract negotiations of Josh Allen and Brian Burns likely heading towards a franchise tag. Delaney Hunter could be the best option for a lot of these teams, and I'm sure a lot of them won't hesitate to pay him this sort of money to keep producing at the level he has been, and he could add a lot to a lot of defenses out there. So that's one of those things that we know a little bit more. Another thing, I should say, that I thought was pretty interesting was that a lot of people in Indianapolis have been kind of passing around the word that, that they believe the Cincinnati Bengals franchise tagged T. Higgins so early. He was actually the first one to be tagged so early that it kind of leads them to believe that he could most likely be traded later this offseason. I've mentioned before just on these shows that Jamar Chase is also due for a contract extension, and you don't really know how much money T. Higgins is going to want, but you know more that Jamar Chase is going to want a lot of money, top of the league, top of the receiver market type of money. Probably close to Justin Jefferson, if you're being honest, because of the relationship that they have. I'm sure they always have a competition at least going on between both of them because they went to LSU obviously together. They've been so connected throughout their whole careers in college, now into the NFL. If Justin's getting a lot of money, you can almost bet 100% that Jamar Chase is going to want the same amount, if not close to Justin Jefferson. So that's going to be a lot of money already on Chase. And if T. Higgins wants also a good amount, it's not going to work out already. I think a lot of people have given up on Tyler Boyd as well. There's no chance he's coming back with the kind of money that T. Higgins and Jamar Chase are going to want if they choose to keep both of them. So Tyler Boyd's already been ruled out, and T. Higgins is also right now at I would say a 60-40, 60 that he stays and 40 that he goes among teams. But it is gaining traction just because they have other free agents to worry about, as well as they've already paid Joe a lot of money. So if you got Joe to stay, I'm sure he's going to advocate a lot for Jamar Chase to stay, his main target. He's going to get a lot of money. So T. Higgins right now, he's under contract. Zach Taylor has said that he wants him to stay, but, it's getting traction that people think they don't want to lose him, and instead of losing him for nothing, they'll trade him and get something in return from him and kind of sacrifice that and at least get some compensation for him. If they do trade for him, I expect nothing less than a second for him, just based on his production. He's still young. I think he's just turned 25, or is going to be 25, so he's entering those crucial years, that prime of his career. If he signs a big deal elsewhere, or actually if he gets traded elsewhere in a sign-and trade, the team wanting him is going to have to produce a lot of compensation for the Bengals to get their hands on him. There's a lot of teams out there that need receivers, especially with Mike Evans now off the market. T. Higgins starts to become a bit more appetizing for these teams. But on the wide receiver train, we're going to move to Brandon Ayuk. And he's another interesting one because the 49ers want to keep him. They want to get his contract sorted. But with a lot of talks around them and them having to make some big decisions in terms of negotiations and who they cut, who they keep, who they really value, he could be sacrificed just because of the contract he's going to want. And, there was a lot of hostility, bad feelings after the Super Bowl where he wasn't really targeted as much and he didn't really perform to the level that he expects himself to. He posted something on Instagram. He's been kind of cold about it in his responses to the contract negotiations. So he also could be a serious trade candidate if no extension gets done, if the 49ers feel that this isn't going anywhere. Instead of losing him for nothing, same thing as T. Higgins, they'll trade him for something and probably get a good haul back for him. Again, second round, probably the minimum. Multiple picks could be in talks as well. but another team could get their hands on him, and he could be a number one on a lot of different teams that have no receivers. Just off the top of my head, he could go to the Titans and be a number one. The Patriots potentially with a new number one if Kendrick Bourne doesn't re-sign there. And then potentially wanting to trade Devontae Parker. They're going to need a wide receiver one if they draft the quarterback number 3. So those are options for Ayuk and the Niners. But again, it's starting to become more concrete, but nothing has been sincerely reported. Talks around cornerbacks as well, like L'Jarius Sneed has been discussed. A potential landing option for him has been the Detroit Lions. The reports around the Lions have said that they want to sign a top-tier cornerback one. They were lacking that really a lot last year. I think it hurt them a lot against the Bucs with Mike Evans, Chris Godwin. Just in that game, I know they won, but the Bucs almost came back in that game, and it just hurt them in other games as well with the Niners. They don't really have a bona fide number one, and L'Jarius Sneed has proven to be that. So there's been talks around them potentially willing to pay him a lot of money in the market and make him one of the top earners and get him on their team as well. But we're going to see where that goes. The Falcons are always there, like I mentioned last week. In the same division as the Falcons, Marshawn Lattimore has started to become a lot more prevalent in trade talks just because of the Saints cap situation. Like I mentioned, they're always very deep in the deficit, and he is a high earner for them. And, he's in a spot where right now he earns a lot. The Saints might have to make a move if they can't figure out other negotiations elsewhere. He could be a trade candidate, and any team, again, would be likely to sign him. The Dolphins could be one after losing Xavier Howard in free agency, just cutting him, not being able to re-sign him. They could be an option as well for Marshawn Lattimore and the defensive back market, as well as Christian Wilkins. It's becoming more and more serious that he's not getting the franchise tag. A lot of reporters and a lot of analysts have said he's going to hit the free agency market, and a big favorite for Wilkins has been the Houston Texans, with Jonathan Grenard also being a free agent. They could afford to lose him and sign Christian Wilkins, especially because of their defensive tackle position not being the strongest. They could sacrifice some of the money to Grenard and use it for Christian Wilkins, who's coming off his best year, recording 9 sacks and just being one of the best defensive tackles in terms of stuffing the run, just being a menace in there, not allowing anything to get through him. He could add a lot to that defense for the run defense. They already have Will Anderson on the side. You add Christian Harris to that, I'm sure they could find another pass rusher in this draft or sign another one if they choose on top of Christian Wilkins. Where does that leave Saquon? You're going to have to pick and choose there, most likely, between an expensive pass rusher and Saquon. But Christian Wilkins has been rumored to go there as well, as I'm sure he will be to a lot of teams that are looking for a player of his caliber. And just the last thing, funny enough, on the day today that Jason Kelce retired, ESPN's Jeremy Fowler has spoken to a lot of sources that they also believe Fletcher Cox will also be joining Jason Kelce, retiring this offseason. Obviously, nothing has been concrete, but that's sort of the feeling that Jeremy Fowler's getting, and a lot of people are starting to get with him. Jason Kelce has already retired today, and I'm sure Fletcher Cox, he's also an unrestricted free agent. How big of a market is he going to garner? He might decide that it's best for him to just retire this offseason, but we're going to have to wait and see. And then just the last thing to wrap it up, some things to still be determined, things that haven't been really talked about as much. The Dolphins and the Eagles have some decisions to make on their wide receiver twos, Jalen Waddle and Devontae Smith, who are contract extension eligible for the first time this offseason, but they already have a lot of money going to A.J. Brown and Tyreek Hill, and the Dolphins are already in a cap deficit. It's not looking great for them, so they're going to most likely wait on them, but that's another thing kind of looming for these teams that have a lot of talent, but they have to pay these guys as well, and some tough decisions could be made there, but we're going to have to wait and see. Joey, and in terms of the Chargers, moving on to them, they have a lot of salary cap issues to figure out, mostly with Joey Bosa, Khalil Mack, Keenan Allen, and Mike Williams. They actually take up more than half of the Chargers' cap, and that's ridiculous for only 4 players. But the sense is that some of them are going to have to go, but really nothing's been made on who's going to go. And right now, the sense I'm getting from a lot of reports, articles that I've read, it seems that Keenan Allen will most likely restructure his deal and he'll be open to staying. Same with Joey Bosa, just because edge rushers are very limited. You're not going to find another one probably better than Joey Bosa on the market right now. And Khalil Mack and Mike Williams, it leaves them on the outside looking in, because Khalil Mack, of his age, he still produced a lot, so he could garner a good market for himself. He's been in trade talks as well, so the Chargers could get something from him. And Mike Williams is coming off a pretty bad injury, and he's most likely to, if not be cut, just be allowed to test the free agency market. But those guys are in a very tough spot right now in terms of cap. The Chargers are trying to get something going with Jim Harbaugh there, and they can't really do that if a lot of their money is going to just 4 guys. So they're going to have to make a decision there, but nothing's really made too much of that. And just the last thing, I thought was interesting was that former Eagles safety C.J. Gardner-Johnson is a free agent now, and he's getting talks back to potentially signing again with the Philadelphia Eagles. They released Kevin Byard recently, and that project didn't go well. They actually signed Terrell Edmonds and let him go because of his performance. They traded him for Byard to the Titans. So now really their only safety that's really been there and produced a good amount has been Reed Blankenship, but he needs somebody else to complement him. That safety for the Eagles hasn't really been a strong suit as of late. So he's kind of been voiced to return to them. A lot of questions still there. He could return to the Lions if they so choose, but the Titans have been interested in him, and the Eagles have always been an aggressive team to go after guys they want, but the kind of money that CJ would want on a multi-year deal, we'll have to wait and see where that kind of ends up. And that kind of wraps up that segment just on questions still to be answered and things that have started to pick up a bit more traction, but we're still going to have to wait and see what these things pan out to. It's just interesting to see where these things are at this point, because a lot is just chatter right now, not really too much action until, like I mentioned before, the league year starts on March 13th. But saying that, I'm going to send it to the last break of the show, and on the other side of it, I'm going to talk about J.J. McCarthy. Is he worth a top 5 pick? Could he have some intangibles that are better than some of the top 3 guys? All that and more coming up after this break. Don't go anywhere. You're not going to want to miss the talk on J.J. McCarthy. Thank you for joining me on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, or sticking around to this final segment of the episode. I'm your host, Manny Maradiege, and getting into the final discussion of the show, the hottest topic around the NFL Combine has been J.J. McCarthy and his performance, interviews with teams, and the drills that he did at the NFL Combine have people feeling a lot better about him and a lot more positive, showing him in a positive light than they did at the start of this. And I have a few reasons why and things I wanted to talk about with J.J. McCarthy, just because initially the questions among the NFL representatives about J.J. McCarthy were that, he won the national championship. It's awesome that he did that. It's very impressive that he did that with the team that he had, Jim Harbaugh there as well. But people had questions about his arm talent, his size coming into the draft, and he kind of put all those to rest just initially on the measurements and the evaluations before he actually threw. He came in at 6'2", at 219 pounds, which was 10 pounds more than he was listed by Michigan at the start of the college season. So he looked a lot bigger than people were expecting. And I watched some of the combine mostly that day because of the quarterbacks and wide receivers. So initially, just from what I thought, my initial thoughts on his size, he looked a lot bigger and much more filled out than I thought. So that was already a plus. And on top of it, just comparing him to the other quarterbacks, he was already taller than Caleb Williams and Bo Nix, and he's also now 5 pounds heavier than those guys. And Bo Nix, initially at the start of all of this offseason, Bo Nix and JJ were very close to, but I think these measurements not only help him jump on top of Bo Nix, or over Bo Nix, I should say. Comparing him to Caleb Williams, he's supposed to go number 1, and just based on size alone, he fills out better than Caleb Williams. A lot of teams make that a big deal, how tall they are, the size of their quarterback, especially going into the National Football League. I don't have to talk about how physical it is. That only helps them. And just based on athleticism, I think all these guys are very athletic. They move well outside the pocket. They're good in the pocket. And leading into just arm talent, away from size, he performed very well in the position drills, throwing to some of these receivers in front of these scouts and getting that first impression out there. I thought it was a big deal. I don't think I mentioned it on the show, but just throwing at the combine. I know I talked about a lot of the players that didn't perform at the combine. Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, Malik Neighbors, Marvin Harrison. They all didn't test at the combine, and J.J. McCarthy did. And I didn't talk about how important that was, at least to me, because of, I think the biggest reason just is getting that recency bias, that first impression out there to these scouts. And it makes a lot of difference at the start, especially because it helps build that hype a little bit around you. It climbs you up draft boards like it does to J.J. McCarthy. And if you perform really well and just blow everybody out of the water with your interviews, the testing and everything, you're the talk of everything. You're in the news everywhere. Everyone's talking about you. And they don't have anything else. These other quarterbacks don't have anything else to kind of back that up. Yeah, they have the film. Obviously, if you're Caleb Williams, you have the on-field tape that everyone can show. Here's why he's better, obviously. But these other guys that are kind of in a loop of, are they going to go top 3? Are they going to drop? Are teams going to trade out of the top 3 because they don't need a quarterback? These other guys, Jaden Daniels, Drake May, they didn't throw, so they don't have anything recently to back up their case for being ahead of J.J. McCarthy. He projected his abilities. He was popular personality-wise with everybody, so he's already giving off those good sensations to everybody that these other quarterbacks just chose not to. And, he's going to gain all this media attention. He's going to be in the news a lot more. And just hearing his name over and over again, it's going to make people look him up, find out what he's really about, and then they might think, oh, he's actually a good player. A lot of these scouts, representatives for these teams, might think, I wasn't really taking him serious before, but now he blew everybody out of the water. I'm going to look more into him, and maybe I don't have to trade up for a Drake May. I don't have to invest all this stuff in Jaden Daniels. If J.J. McCarthy is just as good, if not better than them in some estimations, why would I move? I could save my draft picks and just wait on J.J. McCarthy, add an 8 with the Falcons, add a number 6 spot with the Giants. Only have to trade up to the number 5 spot if you're the Raiders, if you're the Vikings, if you don't get a quarterback in free agency, you don't have to trade up to a number 2 or a number 3 because the Chargers are most likely the favorite to trade out of that 5 spot, and you can jump these teams like the Giants and the Falcons and get J.J. McCarthy at a cheaper price than you would have at the start of the Combine where people thought, it was top 3 or you're not going to get a really good quarterback. J.J. McCarthy has blown everybody out of the water, and ESPN's Louis Riddick, a former team executive, he's been in these situations, making some of these decisions. He went on the scene, or he was in the scene at Indianapolis, and he talked with other representatives around the league and just supporting the idea that J.J. McCarthy is rising in a lot of people's minds. In his words, he said, "I'll go so much as to say this, just off camera, talking to some personnel people, they think J.J. McCarthy's going top 5. Just adding on to that story of, J.J. McCarthy and his sort of resume that he's building with these teams. He met with a lot of teams, actually. The Bears, the Patriots, the Commanders, obviously those in the top 3. He met with the Giants, they're at 6. The Vikings, the Broncos, the Raiders, like I mentioned. Even the Seattle Seahawks. Still questions around their quarterback position. Drew Lock most likely not coming back. And Geno Smith on an expiring deal. He's getting older. He met with them, so that's pretty intriguing as well as the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who don't have a quarterback as of right now. Still need to sign Baker, or they could decide to go through the draft and get J.J. McCarthy if they feel that's in their best interest. And they want to sign somebody else, not use up that money on Baker Mayfield. Everyone, teams that weren't even in the conversation for a quarterback before, Seattle and the Buccaneers, are now projecting that interest in J.J. McCarthy because of him performing above everyone's expectations at the Combine. And do I buy some of this hype? What I think of all of this, I think he's more talented than people gave him credit for at the start. Yeah, I also had questions about his height. I'll definitely admit that. I'm pretty sure I said it on this show, but now that I saw those questions be essentially answered with him coming in heavier, a lot more filled out, giving off the sensation that he could withstand some of the hits in whatever situation he leads up to. That's kind of eased my doubts in my mind. But then other than that, just on the quarterbacks that are in the talks with him, one of them being Drake May. I think Drake May was the one that was just on the outside. I think Jaden Daniels and Caleb Williams were battling for who was the best. A lot of people had Jaden Daniels. Most of them had Caleb. And then there was Drake May that was voiced to need more time than these other guys. He was going to have to be on the same plan as a Jordan Love, kind of sit back, wait, develop him a little bit more. He didn't perform at the Combine, didn't prove anybody wrong, didn't silence those doubts. If anything, those doubts grew a lot more with people like Merrill Hodge coming out and saying all these negative things about his game. Just on terms of on the field, he thought he was pretty sloppy, wasn't good at decision making, all this stuff. He didn't silence any of that because he didn't throw, and J.J. McCarthy took advantage of it. And now I'm starting to believe that people might take a J.J. McCarthy over a Drake May because of the recent positive news that is trending in the way of J.J. McCarthy in comparison to Drake May. That's something that came up to it. Does it have to do a lot with the recent success that Michigan had? Probably to some extent, because you saw all the success that surrounded J.J. McCarthy. You wanted to see if he could back it up in front of NFL scouts and at the Combine, and he kind of did just that and proved that, it wasn't just about the team. It wasn't all the guys around him were carrying him, and all he had to do was just not mess up. I think with some of the throws he had at the Combine, some of his performances with teams and meeting with teams, everyone kind of got a sense of what this kid is like, a potential future leader for their organization. I think a lot of people were left very satisfied with what they found out about J.J. McCarthy. And just on top of that, if you're a Giants, if you're the Giants, or if you're the Falcons, what really do you have to lose with waiting or just moving up to that 5 spot to take J.J. McCarthy at this point? Because you're in already a situation where offensively, you're about to lose Saquon Barkley. There's major doubts around Daniel Jones and where he stands. I mentioned Brian Daboll and General Manager Joe Schoen. Are they on the hot seat? They might feel like they have to do something. And you're not really losing anything by just moving up a spot and taking a quarterback like J.J. McCarthy, because he doesn't cost you as much just to move into the 5 spot. And if he performs very well, it buys you guys more time. And if he performs really well, he could start to develop into that franchise guy. And then, all the benefits come with that. If he performs well, people want to play with him. It allows free agents to come in more, want to play for the Giants, instead of looking at the Giants like, I don't know, their quarterback, I don't know about him. Is their head coach going to be there? What's their offense like? Is their defense really that good? If you have a quarterback there, that's a huge negotiation point for teams to want to come play with you. Same with the Falcons. They already have a lot of young talent, and they don't really have much to lose if, the Giants don't draft a quarterback, decide to stick with Daniel Jones. J.J. McCarthy might fall to 8, and then, if he performs very well with a very good team win the Falcons, you could say the talent level with Michigan and the Falcons is the same, if not better. He'll have all the support in the world there, a new offense, new head coach. They're all kind of learning, growing together. It'll be a very positive thing for these teams to just stay put and not have to use a lot of capital to move up for a Jaden Daniels, a Caleb Williams. If J.J. McCarthy right now has proven that he could be a lot closer to them than he is to the other guys like Bo Nix or Michael Penix, who Michael Penix is also climbing up draft boards, but not as much as J.J. McCarthy, I believe. And that's where he kind of stands right now. Really the talk of the combine, the overall winner, you could say, of the combine. A lot of people performed well, but in terms of importance to a team, X-factor kind of players, I think J.J. McCarthy seized his opportunity more than other guys and took advantage of it, and that's why he sits where he does today. Potentially in the top 5, top 10, we're going to have to wait and see. But that's all the time I have for you guys on today's episode. A very interesting conversation there at the end, talking about J.J. McCarthy and what this could mean. Another layer to this NFL draft that's coming up in late April that just sends it in a whole different direction. But, that's going to do it for this episode and that topic. As always, I want to give a huge thank you to everyone listening to this episode or who joined in afterwards during the show or after. Please remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Make sure to also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok for more of this network's content, not just this show. There's other stuff out there as well. But if you like this show, want to tune in more, want to see other episodes I have out there, you could go check out the GSMC Sports Network channel or the Podcast Network channel on YouTube for other YouTube shorts that I've done, the individual video segments of the live episodes. If you can't catch a whole episode, just tune in for one segment, as well as other live shows that I've done that you can catch up on those channels as well. In saying that, I've been your host, Manny Maradiaga. Tune in every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time for more NFL and football conversations. Take care, guys. I'll see you guys all tomorrow.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great.